turning our attention now to the aviation industry. Mike Warner, Senior Market Analysis at Boeing Commercial Airplanes, joins us now from Cape Town to give us Boeing's perspectives on Africa's aviation market over the next 20 years, including a review of African market dynamics and aeroplane demand. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. Let's start off with some news that I came across. 700 new aircraft is what Africa will require over the next 20 years to meet with the growing demand. Give us your perspective on how the industry is going to change on the continent.
Yes, and thank you for having me here. Well, first of all, we've seen a real rebound in air travel over the last year. Air traffic was certainly down in 2009 due to the economic recession, but we've seen quite a bounce back, and I think Africa has been leading the way. International traffic to and from Africa has been up about 13% this year. So we've seen a really nice, healthy rebound in this market. But when we look long term, we continue to see a strong growing market in Africa. And as you said, the Boeing company is forecasting that African airlines will need over 700 new airplanes over the next 20 years. And we value those airplanes at about $80 billion. So it's certainly an important and dynamic market for us.
Well, Mike, just looking at the losses that the aviation industry experienced in 2009, amounting to around $11 billion. For this year, they say the losses will come down to around $5.6 billion. Just looking at the differences between the overcapacity in certain areas, such as Asia and, of course, in Europe as well. And this is why we're seeing consolidation in the industry, and how it differs to that of Africa, because we also know we have a big issue in terms of the infrastructure that is required with the growing demand.
Yes, that's right. And actually, the industry has really been forecasting a much more profitable year. I think, as I said, things have bounced back quicker than they expected. The International Air Transport Association is now expecting that the world's airlines will actually turn a healthy profit this year, and that African airlines will be profitable for the first time since 2002. So that's really due to the increased market demand, and these airlines really focus on cutting costs and restructuring their business. So again, we do see a healthy demand for African carriers, and they are returning to profitability, I think, this year.
Well, just looking at some of the trends that we have been seeing, it's not only about freight services, passengers as well. The demand is growing quite rapidly. We've also got an issue with the fact that Africa's fleet at the moment is around 20 years old on average. Can we grow fast enough? I mean, clearly there's a lot of demand for African commodities as well, which is fueling the industry.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a big demand for African commodities, many exports demanded today. But you're right, the African fleet does need to renew itself. It's about 20 years old, as you said, and we think that African airlines really need to renew their fleet, bring in newer, more efficient, more energy efficient airplanes to compete with some of their European and Asian rivals.
Exactly, and this is, of course, the cost of fuel as well. Just looking at some of the fleet that is required on the African continent, we know that 150 Dreamliner jets have already been ordered by 50 various customers on the continent: Kenya Airways, Ethiopian Airways, Royal Air Morocco, and Air Seychelles as well. Just tell us about where you think the demand is going to come from, and, of course, it's all about funding these fleets as well.
It is, and you know, we really see the 787 Dreamliner as an ideal tool for African carriers. It's a long-range airplane. It's the same range as a Boeing 747 or a Boeing 777, but a smaller intermediate size. Really an ideal route, an ideal tool for opening new routes from, say, Africa into the United States, Africa into Europe. And we're doing so many things with that airplane to make it more efficient. It'll burn about 20% less fuel than today's airplane, which really gives it a huge advantage over other airplanes operating in today's fleets.
Well, just looking at the fact that the aviation industry does want to achieve carbon neutral growth from 2020 and reduce emissions by 50% by 2050. Tell us about the new fuel technologies that have come to the fore. Do you see that changing rapidly down the line, given the fact that, I mean, we got quite a shock in July 2008 when we saw Brent crude prices hitting $147 a barrel. So clearly new alternatives need to be found.
Clearly, I mean, fuel prices have fallen since that point, but they're still at historically high levels. And at Boeing, our thoughts are really that the answer is in technology. We're really looking to new technologies to make our airplanes more efficient, like the 787 Dreamliner, which, as I said, is much more fuel efficient than today's airplanes. We're also looking at alternative sources of fuel, and we've been testing those out with many of our airline customers. So we think there's answers there. We know that our airplanes need to become more efficient. not only for environmental responsibility, but for economics. So we're putting a lot of Boeing funding right now into technology to make our airplanes more
Mike,
efficient.
just very, very quickly, looking at the track record of aviation on the continent, a lot of crashes happening in Africa. Do you see that changing?
Yes, and obviously air safety and reliability is really crucial to growth in Africa. And that's really coming down to the governments, to the regulators, and to the airlines to really adopt the latest standards and to become more safe, because that is really critical to growth.
Mike, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.